He looked down at his wrist, hesitated for a second, and then started peeling it off like it was illegal equipment instead of a fitness tracker. And that tiny moment just sparked one of the strangest tech wars tennis has ever seen. Because this isn't just about a wearable. This is about control, data, privacy, power, and whether Grand Slams are about tradition or the future. And by the end of the story, you might look at on-court technology very differently. Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, and Aryna Sabalenka all arrive in Melbourne doing something completely normal in modern tennis. They were wearing Whoop devices, the same performance trackers they use all season to monitor recovery, strain, sleep, and overall physical load. Nothing new, nothing controversial, until suddenly it was right before key matches. Officials stepped in and told them to take the devices off, not adjust them, not cover them, remove them completely. Alcaraz had to take his off before facing Tommy Paul. Sinner was told the same ahead of his clash with Luciano Dartari. Sabalenka got the instruction earlier in the tournament. Just like that, something allowed almost everywhere else in pro tennis was treated like contraband at a Grand Slam. And here's where it gets weird. Whoop and similar trackers are permitted at most ATP and WTA events. Players have worn them for years in training blocks and even around tournaments. They're not communication tools. They don't give tactical advice. They don't send signals from coaches. They collect biometric data for recovery and health. But at the four majors, suddenly they're a problem. That inconsistency is what lit the fuse, and Whoop CEO Will Ahmed didn't exactly respond quietly. Instead of backing down, he went public, loudly. He posted that Whoop would start sending upgraded, discreet sensors to players at the Australian Open. Sensors that could be worn inside specially designed undergarments. Harder to see, harder to remove. And then he dropped a line that sent social media into a frenzy, saying it would take a strip search to keep Whoop off the court. Now, obviously, that line was dramatic, maybe even reckless. But it worked, because suddenly this wasn't just a quiet rule disagreement. It was a full-blown public standoff between a tech company and the most traditional tournaments in tennis. And the players are caught right in the middle. From a player's perspective, this isn't about fashion or branding. These devices help them understand their bodies during one of the most brutal sports calendars in the world. 5-set matches in extreme heat. Back-to-back tournaments across continents. Recovery windows that are shrinking as the tour gets more intense. Aryna Sabalenka didn't hide her frustration. She openly questioned why devices she wears all year are suddenly banned at the biggest events. She made it clear she sees them as health tools, not advantages. And honestly, that's a hard point to argue against. We're not talking about smart glasses giving live stats. We're not talking about AI whispering tactics mid-rally. This is heart rate, sleep quality, and strain load. Information players already track off court. So, why would Grand Slams draw the line here? One possible reason is optics. Majors have always positioned themselves as the guardians of tennis tradition. White outfits at Wimbledon, strict on-court conduct, tight control over what appears during matches. A visible tech device might feel like a step toward a hyper-digitized version of the sport they're not ready to embrace. Another layer could be data ownership. And this is where things get really interesting. If players are wearing devices that collect high-level biometric data during matches, who owns that data? The player? The company? Could be sold, analyzed, or used in broadcast one day. Could it reveal physical vulnerabilities opponents might exploit if leaked? That's not science fiction. Sports data is big business. And Grand Slams might be wary of opening a door they can't close. But here's the tension. Tennis markets itself as evolving. Faster courts. Hawkeye line calling. Advanced analytics on TV. Yet when it comes to wearable recovery tech, suddenly it's stop, go back, take it off. It creates a strange contradiction. The sport embraces technology for officiating and entertainment, but hesitates when it comes to athlete self-monitoring. Well, Ahmed clearly saw an opportunity in that gap. His public response wasn't just defense. It was strategy. By framing the ban as outdated and anti-athlete, he turned a quiet rule into a player welfare conversation, and fans started paying attention. Because when you hear that players have to remove something that tracks their health in extreme conditions, it sounds less like regulation and more like resistance to change. But let's be fair. There's another side. Grand Slams operate under their own rule structures. They have to think about competitive fairness, visual consistency, sponsorship conflicts, and enforceability. If you allow one wearable, do you open the door to others? What happens when devices become more advanced? Where do you draw the line? That slippery slope argument probably lives inside those tournament boardrooms. Still, the rollout of this ban looked messy. Players were told individually, sometimes right before matches. That makes it feel reactive rather than clearly planned and communicated. And that's where controversy thrives. Not just in decisions, but in how they're delivered. Now add in the personalities involved. Alcaraz, the young superstar who represents tennis's future. Sinner, another face of the next generation. Sabalenka, a dominant world number one. These aren't fringe players testing boundaries. These are headline names. When they're told to remove something they rely on, the story gets bigger automatically. And then you have a CEO essentially saying, fine, we'll go smaller, more discreet, harder to detect. That shifts the narrative from compliance to quiet rebellion. It raises a wild question. If a device is truly invisible and doesn't interfere with play, is banning it about function or about control? Because enforcement becomes tricky. Officials can see a wristband. They can't easily see a sensor embedded in clothing. Are we heading toward equipment checks that feel more like airport security? That's the uncomfortable image people reacted to when Ahmed made that strip search comment. Even if it was exaggerated, it highlighted how awkward this could get. From a pure performance standpoint, I don't see these trackers as competitive advantages in the middle of a match. They don't tell you where to serve on break point. They don't warn you about a drop shot. They help players manage recovery over days and weeks. And in a sport with rising injury rates and brutal scheduling, that feels more like protection than enhancement. But tradition in tennis moves slowly. Very slowly. Think about how long it took for coaching from the stands to become more accepted, or how electronic line calling faced resistance before becoming normal. Every major shift goes through this phase where it feels wrong until it suddenly feels obvious. We might be watching the early chapter of that story with wearables. Right now it's Whoop. In 5 years, it could be integrated performance fabrics, real-time hydration monitors, or heat stress alerts built into clothing. Sports science isn't slowing down. The question is whether rule makers adapt with it or keep trying to hold the line. And the Australian Open just became the flashpoint, because this didn't happen quietly at a small event. It happened on one of the biggest stages in the sport with top players during prime time. That guarantees attention. And attention brings pressure. If players keep speaking up like Sabalenka did, governing bodies will have to explain their stance more clearly. Because we said so won't hold up in a modern sport environment driven by transparency and athlete advocacy. At the same time, companies like Whoop have to be careful. Pushing too aggressively can make it seem like they're trying to strong-arm tradition for marketing. There's a balance between advocating for athlete tools and turning tournaments into battlegrounds. Right now, though, the momentum feels like it's with the players. Fans relate more easily to athlete health than to administrative caution. If the conversation becomes safety and recovery versus outdated image rules, that's a tough PR fight for the majors. And don't be surprised that this doesn't end in Melbourne. The French Open, Wimbledon, and the US Open all follow similar policies. If one of them softens first, the others might follow. If they all hold firm, the standoff gets bigger. Either way, this is no longer a tiny equipment note in a rule book. It's a live debate about how modern tennis wants to look and who gets to decide. So here's what I want to know from you. Should Grand Slam stick to strict tradition and keep wearables off the court? Or is it time to fully embrace performance tech if it helps players stay healthier? Drop your take in the comments, because this conversation is just getting started, and tennis might never look at on-court technology the same way again.